The manager barely glanced at the paper before laughing. It was a crayon drawing made by a 9-year-old girl. A crooked little house. A red barn. A smiling old man standing beside a field. The entire room chuckled. But less than a year later, that same drawing would become the most expensive piece of paper the bank had ever ignored. And the mistake would cost them millions. 9-year-old Emily Carter lived with her grandfather, Walter, on a small farm outside the town of Millfield. Walter wasn't rich. In fact, most people assumed he was barely getting by. His pickup truck was older than Emily. His farmhouse needed paint. His boots were patched so many times that nobody remembered their original color. But Walter never complained. Every morning before sunrise, he walked the fields with Emily. He taught her how to tell when rain was coming. How to plant corn. How to respect the land. And most importantly, how to keep promises. Land remembers, Walter often said. If you take care of it, it'll take care of you. Emily loved those walks. She loved the farm. And she especially loved her grandfather. Then one spring morning, everything changed. Walter suffered a heart attack while repairing a fence. He survived. But the medical bills were devastating. Years of rising costs, poor harvests, and hospital expenses pushed him deeper into debt. The local bank held the mortgage on the farm. At first, they promised to work with him. Then management changed. A new regional director arrived. His name was Richard Barnes. And Richard cared about numbers more than people. To him, Walter wasn't a farmer. He was a file. A debt. A problem. 3 months later, the bank sent a foreclosure notice. Walter had 60 days to pay what he owed. Otherwise, the farm would be taken. Emily overheard the conversation. That night she sat quietly at the kitchen table. Walter tried to smile. "It's all right, sweetheart." But she could see the worry in his eyes. For the first time in her life, her grandfather looked afraid. So Emily decided to help. The next day she grabbed her crayons. On a sheet of paper, she drew the farm. The house. The barn. The fields. And her grandfather. At the top she wrote, "Please don't take my grandpa's farm. It's our home." She folded the drawing carefully and placed it in an envelope. Then she rode her bicycle into town. Straight to the bank. The receptionist looked confused. The manager looked annoyed. Emily handed him the drawing. "I made this for you." The manager unfolded it. Several employees gathered nearby. Within seconds, someone laughed. Another employee smiled. The manager shook his head. "That's very sweet." Then he tossed it onto a pile of paperwork. Emily's face fell. "Will it help?" The manager sighed. "That's not how banks work." The room laughed again. Emily quietly walked away. Nobody noticed the tears in her eyes. And nobody thought about the drawing ever again. Except one person. An elderly janitor named Frank. Frank had seen everything. He'd worked in that building for nearly 40 years. After closing time, he found the drawing in a trash bin. Something about it bothered him. So he took it out. Smoothed the wrinkles. And kept it. For reasons he couldn't explain. 2 weeks later, the foreclosure became official. Walter lost the farm. The land was transferred to the bank. A development company quickly purchased the property. They planned to build luxury housing. The bulldozers arrived. Walter and Emily packed their belongings. And left. The day they drove away, Emily looked back at the farm and cried. Walter said nothing. He simply gripped the steering wheel tighter. Construction began immediately. But strange problems followed. Survey crews reported inconsistencies. Property lines didn't match historical records. Old maps conflicted with modern documentation. The developers assumed it was a clerical issue. Then things got worse. Much worse. One surveyor discovered something buried in county archives. A collection of land deeds dating back over a century. As lawyers dug deeper, they uncovered a shocking error. For nearly 90 years, the property records had been wrong. A massive section of land surrounding the farm had never legally transferred ownership. Thousands of acres. Valuable acres. Land now worth millions. The legal ownership chain pointed to only one living heir. Walter Carter. The discovery triggered chaos. Construction stopped instantly. Investors panicked. Lawyers flooded the town. The development company sued the bank. The bank sued title agencies. Title agencies sued former contractors. Everyone blamed everyone else. But one fact remained. The bank had foreclosed on property they didn't fully understand. And the legal disaster was growing by the day. News spread quickly. Television crews arrived. Reporters filled the town. Suddenly everyone wanted to speak with Walter. The same people who had ignored him now wanted meetings. Interviews. Agreements. Settlements. But Walter remained calm. Years of farming had taught him patience. Eventually, courts ruled in his favor. The forgotten land rights belonged to him. The value exceeded several $1 million. The bank's mistakes triggered lawsuits, penalties, and compensation claims that reached staggering amounts. Experts estimated total losses in the millions. One evening, months later, Frank the janitor visited Walter. He carried a small folder. Inside was Emily's crayon drawing. The very one from the bank. Emily immediately recognized it. "You saved it?" Frank nodded. "I thought it mattered." Walter stared at the picture. Then looked at Emily. Neither spoke for a moment. A local newspaper later published the drawing beside a story about the legal battle. The image spread across social media. Millions viewed it. People weren't talking about lawsuits. They weren't talking about land records. They were talking about a little girl who had begged adults to do the right thing. And how nobody listened. Until it was too late. The public backlash was brutal. The bank's reputation suffered enormously. Customers closed accounts. Community leaders criticized management. Several executives lost their positions. Among them was Richard Barnes. The man who had dismissed the drawing. The man who believed everything could be measured on a spreadsheet. A year later, Walter made an unexpected decision. Instead of selling all the land to developers, he created a community trust. Part of the property became protected farmland. Another section funded scholarships for local children. And one building was dedicated to teaching financial literacy to families. Above the entrance hung a framed picture. Not a certificate. Not a legal document. Not $1 million contract. A simple crayon drawing. Made by a little girl. During the opening ceremony, a reporter asked Walter if he felt revenge toward the bank. Walter smiled. Then shook his head. No. Why not? Walter looked at Emily. Because this was never about getting even. He pointed toward the drawing. It was about remembering that every file on a desk belongs to a real person. The crowd fell silent. Because everyone knew he was right. Years later, visitors still stopped to look at that picture. Children often laughed at how simple it looked. Adults usually stood quietly. Because they understood something children already knew. Sometimes the most important warnings don't come from lawyers. Or executives. Or experts. Sometimes they come from a child holding a box of crayons. And ignoring them can cost far more than money.